What's up, Yins guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fishing PA with Ryan Reed. In this episode, we're going to cover the topic of trout fishing. Here in the state of Pennsylvania, it's April 11th, and our statewide opener for trout is on April 14th, which is this upcoming Saturday. So I thought for this episode, we could focus on basic equipment that I use to catch trout here in the state of Pennsylvania, talk about a few techniques, and then cover some basic fishing lures that I found beneficial to catch trout. Now, I'm not the best trout fisherman, and I don't spend a lot of time throughout the year fishing for trout. However, my family has a tradition every single year where we meet up at Twin Lakes in Greensburg, rent a paddle boat, and do a little bit of trout fishing. I'm super pumped for this Saturday, and I'm hoping to get it on film to give you guys some insight into my family and some of our traditions. Okay, I want to go ahead and get started in our discussion about trout fishing, but really where I want to start is I want to talk about the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the 2018 season, sizes, and creel limitations for all species of trout. So all species of trout in the state of Pennsylvania, including salmon. Our regional opening day for the southeastern PA counties started on March 31st, 2018 at 8 a.m., and that goes through September 3rd. Now, our regular season in PA, as I had mentioned, is April 14th, starting at 8 a.m. through September 3rd, 2018. The minimum size for all species of trout is at least 7 inches. So make sure when you're catching those fish and you're keeping them, they're at least 7 inches long. Now, our daily creel limit for streams and lakes, or a combination of both, is 5 fish per person. So you got to make sure you don't have 5 or more fish, or more than 5 fish, on a stringer at any given time. So these are the kind of things you want to double check from Fish and Boat just to make sure you understand the seasons, the sizes, and the creel limitations for your county. Okay, so to talk trout fishing, or affectionately known as in Western Pennsylvania as trout fishing. So when we talk trout fishing, we're talking about really 4 different species of trout in our local area. So we're talking about rainbow trout, we're talking about brook trout, we're talking about brown trout, and also, if you fish the tributaries up in Erie, you're talking about steelhead, which I typically do later in the year, potentially in December. Now, trout is actually the 4th most popular fish in all of North America. So, in the state of Pennsylvania, we have a lot of stocking programs, and our waters are actually very good for trout. So, naturally, trout fishing in the state of PA is a fairly big sport, and the fishing can be really, really good. Now, I'm not a stream fisherman. I don't like standing around the same hole with 10 or 12 guys shooting a fly in and out for hours upon hours, butts to elbows. That doesn't work for me. Now, I will walk streams when there's nobody else around and I'll cast them, but I have a tendency to fish lakes. So what I want to talk about is I want to talk about where we find these fish, or typically how I fish them, here in the state of Pennsylvania. Now again, trout are typically found in cold or fresh water. So a lot of the streams and rivers that we have here in PA, they hold native trout or they hold stock trout. But a lot of the lakes, like Twin Lakes in Greensburg, they have really awesome stocking programs throughout the year where you can go out and you can continuously catch fish. So what sets most of the water in a lake apart from the water in streams and rivers is that lakes have little discernible current, except close to where the water enters and exits the lake. So in still waters, trout must feed by actively pursuing or hunting their prey. In rivers and streams, much of a trout's food is brought to it courtesy of the current. So this fact is key in deciding how to fish lakes, because much of what will work in rivers and streams does not work on lakes. We have to find methods in order to get that fish to essentially eat, because the current isn't bringing it its food. This is why identifying where the fish is at, or where the trout are sitting, forces us to play with different depth ranges, starting at the bottom, working our way up in the water column. So if you're fishing in 10 feet of water, the recommendation is to start off the bottom and then work your way up the water column to determine where those fish are at. I also like fishing for steelhead up in Elk or Walnut, up at Erie in the tributaries, or even Trout Run, because there's genuinely a lot of fish that come in to spawn. Okay, there are typically 2 rules of thumb that I live by when I'm trout fishing. Number 1, only stock fish will actually eat power bait. So the native fish, I never put power bait on when I'm fishing streams that I know have native trout in it, or waters that have native trout in it. Number 2, fish over 12 inches typically cut flies and other insects out of their diet. Now, when I say that, that's not going to make or break the bite. However, it's going to really change the types of fish that you're catching. So if you're going to throw flies on, from my perspective or my experience, I'm not going to catch fish that are over 12 or 13 inches. I'm going to catch a lot of the smaller ones in that 7, 8 to 9 inch range. Okay, I want to take a couple of minutes just to talk about the equipment that I typically use to catch trout. Now, whenever I go trout fishing, I'm always going to take a spinning combo with me. In this case, I had a coupon a few years ago for this Shakespeare Agility Graphite Rod and Reel combo. It was initially $20. I think I got it for $12 at Dunham's with the coupon. This rod and reel combo has actually been my best trout combo. This rod is a 6 foot 6 inch combo. This is a medium action, so it actually holds 10 to 17 pound test. Typically what I like to do with this is I like to go with a smaller test line and actually just throw a bunch of line on it. Now I'll typically use this to troll, or I'll use this to cast. Even though this is a cheaper rod and reel combo, it's been really good to me. I actually limited out a few years in a row with this rod. So this has been a great combo. You don't have to go super expensive for trout, and you can also use a lot of lighter type combos. I have another rod and reel combo here. This is actually a Dowa, and this is the Shock series, and this is actually an ultralight rod. If you guys can see that, it's not real long. And again, I pair this with the same line on both of these rod and reel combos. I always use the Berkley Vanish Invisalign, and I go to the 8 pound test on this because it works really well. Plus you can rip a bunch of this off on your reels, and it's fairly cheap too. Now this line is invisible underwater, so this is a fantastic line to use for trout. Now this is also a fluorocarbon, so that's important because a lot of guys will go with mono, but I like fluorocarbon in this case for trout, and they work really well. So that's going to be my standard rod and reel combos when I'm out trout fishing. Okay, I want to take a few minutes to talk about techniques. Now realistically, for me, I only have about 2 or 3 techniques that I use to catch trout. Number 1, trolling either crankbaits, spoons, or some type of bait like a Joe's fly or a Panther Martin or whatever it is if it's a Meps. Now, I do a lot of trolling, especially on the first day on a paddle boat, because I always go to Twin Lakes. Now, throughout the year, I'll also focus on those 3, crankbaits, Joe's flies, and spoons, to catch trout, whether it's in a stream or in a lake, depending upon the situation. So number 1, again, is trolling those types of bait. Number 2, good old bobber and hook combo. Sometimes you just got to go back to this, and when there's a lot of pressure on a lake and people are throwing this, sometimes I just want to go out and sit and catch fish with a bobber and a hook. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, I'm typically trout fishing. And the third style or technique that I use to catch trout is kind of interesting because it's vertical jigging. Now, I've caught a lot of fish, all types of fish on vertical jigging, but what's really interesting about this is one of the newer things over the past couple of years has been to catch trout on jig heads like that, or just random or different types of jig heads and swim baits. In this particular swim bait, it's not a paddle tail, but it's actually a Havoc, and they sell these in smaller sizes. But really, one of the good ones to try out there now is the Gulp Live Minnows. Now these are catching a lot of trout, and I think vertical jigging is probably going to be something that I do with a small paddle tail type swim bait on this upcoming Saturday. So just to recap, my 3 techniques is really trolling, crankbaits, spoons, and inline spinners like the Joe's Flies or the Panther Martins. Number 2 would be good old bobber and hook. And number 3, it's probably going to be vertical jigging with some type of swim bait or even live bait on here, which does produce a lot of fish. Okay, now I want to take a few minutes just to talk about lures that have been effective for me. Now, I already showed you guys the swim baits, which I'm definitely going to try more and more specifically this year. I'm going to take a jig head like that and a swim bait like that, and we're going to see what happens. But there are multiple other lures that I use here that are very, very good, and my family uses consistently to catch fish every year. So a couple of those. I want to start with a crankbait. This crankbait is just legendary. You can't not talk about the Rapala original floating minnow. Now I have this in the F3, and this is a great size for trout because they typically like this black and silver in that smaller size. People say to go with like different trout colors like this. I don't really typically do well on this color. The black and silver has been really good, but get out there and try it. If you guys want to throw a crankbait on the first day, go with the original floater and go with this smaller size because I think it's going to be a really good bait for you, and it's consistently good over time. Okay, number 2, hands down one of my favorite trout baits is a spoon. Now, I've been going with, recently over the last couple of years, I've been going with the Stinger spoons. They have a lot of awesome colors, and I've caught a lot of good trout on these. So that's an example of a Stinger. This is an example of a Stinger. They have a lot of good colors again. This particular color I've caught multiple fish on. You guys can see that. That's really awesome. And then they also have purple. So check out their colors. Stinger spoons are just phenomenal. Another spoon, though, is the little Cleos. And I usually buy these up in Erie because they're pretty cheap. But the little Cleos, I mean, these are fantastic for steelhead, but they also catch a lot of big trout. And it's just the profile, it's the wobble. These types of spoons are just phenomenal. There's a couple of lures out there called Castmasters. And this is kind of a generic version of it made by somebody in Pennsylvania. So if you want to take a look at that, it's kind of very similar to a spoon. And this is going to flutter in the water, so you can kind of troll this, or you can kind of jerk it as well, or even vertical jig it. But those are kind of an honorable mention bait because they're in between a spoon, and they're really kind of versatile baits. Another bait that I want to talk about is the mini food jig. So if you guys can see the mini food jig there, a lot of times we'll tip these with maggots or we'll tip them with mealworms. And again, you can vertical jig these or you can cast them, let them land on top of the water. And these will catch trout, but they'll also catch panfish as well. One bait that I want to continue to talk about this year that's been phenomenal, and I'll actually show you guys a picture at the end of this video. Deanna caught her biggest trout. It was actually her first trout when she started fishing with me on a walleye rig. And I tell you guys this all the time, these walleye rigs catch multiple species of fish, including trout and catfish. So sometimes on the first day of trout at Twin Lakes, we'll throw one of these on with a heavy weight or a split shot. We'll let this thing bounce off the bottom with a worm. You know, it's a simple walleye worm harness, and it produces fish, and a lot of times it produces big fish. So again, give these a try. Check the jigs out, check the spoons out. But my all-time favorite trout bait, whether I'm in a stream or on a lake, hands down, has to be the Joe Fly. And the Joe Fly looks like that. It's got a real nice spinner on it. They have a lot of different colors and sizes. My personal favorite, though, is the 3.5 black woolly worm. Now, the black woolly worm is just a big black woolly worm with the red feathers on it. But they also have like the muddler that kind of looks like that, or trout special that kind of looks like that. They have different names and different colors. They have different blade colors. Some of them are silver, some of them are gold. But the sizes are pretty interesting because you can go up or you can go down. I'm typically running bigger sizes these days with the bigger blades because it seems to attract the bigger fish. Bigger baits catch bigger fish. Smaller baits catch more fish. Maybe you want to downsize to something like that. But the Joe's Fly is a staple of any fisherman. So, you know, with that said, there's just a couple of baits here. You know, check out your swim baits. There's a lot of different types of these. You know, honorable mentions for that. Some of the twister tails you can do to catch trout. Take a look at the crankbaits, the smaller crankbaits. Take a look at your spoons. Take a look at your walleye rigs, your mini food jigs, and of course your Joe flies. And these 5 or 6 lures are going to be fantastic for you. All right, so in closing, I got my trout vest ready to go. I got my JRW fishing worm sack here where I throw all my night crawlers. I got my GAI approved tick spoon in case I get a tick. And I have my fish hands free rod holder mounted onto my vest ready for me to dock my rod. Just to recap, check out the Berkley Invisalign, the Vanish Invisalign. It's really good line for trout. Check out the rod and reel combos like we talked about. You can go with the ultralight or you can go with the other type of spinning reels, the Shakespeare's, for relatively cheap. Check out a couple of the techniques like trolling on paddle boats like at Twin Lakes. That's a great method to catch fish. Check out the spoons that I talked about, the Cleos and the stingers, the mini food jigs, and of course the crankbaits and the Joe flies. Joe flies, hands down, catch me the most fish or the most trout out of any other bait that I have. So I'm really going to try to vertical jig. Hopefully you guys can try that out and see if it works for you. But I'm super excited to get out on the water. Hopefully you guys are too, to get out and do some trout fishing here in the state of PA. So for those of you that have the same types of family traditions that I have with my family, I wish you guys all the best, and I hope everybody's safe. If you guys like what you're seeing or you find this information to be beneficial, please like the video or feel free to subscribe to my channel. If there's something you guys want to see in particular on any type of fishing related topic, feel free to reach out to me and I'll do my best to get a video on that topic out there. I just want to say I really appreciate everybody's attention. Thank you guys very much and take care.